Hey everybody. Most people have heard of Arlington National Cemetery, but you may not have heard the history of how it became a cemetery during the Civil War. The Arlington House and Estate was the estate of General Robert E. Lee's wife, Mary Ann Custus Lee, who was a great-granddaughter of Martha Washington. Now, Mary Ann inherited the estate from her father as a life inheritance, meaning she could live there, she could do what she wanted there, she could run the things, but she was not allowed to sell any part of it. Only a couple of years after her marriage to Robert E. Lee, Virginia ceded from the Union, and on April 20th, 1861, Robert E. Lee resigned his Union Army commission and took command of the armed forces of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Less than a month later, Mary Lee left the grounds for her sister's estate in Fairfax County because she thought the Federal soldiers would take over her estate. Well, when the two nearby cemeteries were full because of all the bloodshed from the Civil War, the Army had to look for new places to bury the dead. Well, Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs ordered personnel to look for new sites. Well, his staff found the Arlington Estate as the best place since it was high, it was free from floods, and it overlooked D.C. In addition, it was politically a good spot because it would deny Lee the use of his home. The first burial at Arlington was May 13, 1864, for William Henry Chrisman. Now, how did the government get a hold of it? Well, the government bought the land at a tax sale in 1864 for $26,800, which is equivalent to about $438,000 today. Mrs. Lee had sent someone to pay the $92 in property taxes, but it had to be done in person and she couldn't go, so she sent somebody. Well, the government agent turned that person around and would not accept the payment. Well, 10 years later, her son Custus Lee sued the United States, claiming he and his family owned it. Well, the Supreme Court ruled in Lee's favor and returned the estate to him. However, 9 years later, in March of 1883, he sold it back to the government for $150,000, which is equivalent to about $3.5 million today. At that time, it became a military reservation. In 1864, the Arlington Mansion originally had 200 acres, but through the years, the cemetery has transferred woodland acres from the National Park Service, received land from the DoD that was the site of the Navy Annex building, acreage from the Department of the Army that had been part of Fort Myer, gained acreage from the city and county roads right-of-way, and other neighboring assets to make it the size it is today, about 624 acres. One of the biggest problems is still the size or the lack of space for the expanding of the cemetery. 800 graves per acre is the optimum, says John C. Metzler, Jr., Arlington superintendent since 1991. If it's much less than that, there may be problems. Now, there are generals and privates and everybody in between buried in Arlington. There are even several presidents. President John Kennedy was buried there after his assassination in 1963. The eternal flame on his gravesite can be seen from across the Potomac on clear nights. Wanting to visit his gravesite is what gave rise to the popularity of the cemetery. There are other various memorials located throughout the grounds. There's a memorial for the Battle of the Bulge. There's a memorial to those who were lost in the space shuttle explosion. And there's even a memorial to those who died on 9/11. Perhaps one of the most well-known memorials is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. The first unknown to be buried there was a soldier from World War I in 1921. Since then, remains from soldiers from World War II and the Korean War have been added. The remains of a soldier from Vietnam were added in 1989, but they were disinterred when they were identified as Air Force First Lieutenant Michael Blassie. He was later reinterred near his home in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, the crypt for the Vietnam unknown will remain empty. The changing of the guard takes place either every half hour or hour, depending on the time of year. Now, if you have a family member buried in Arlington, you can get a family pass and visit whenever you want. However, if you don't have a family member buried there, then you have to park and pay a fee to take a tour bus around the grounds. Now, there are discounted rates for groups. All right. And the buses will take you to all of the various memorials throughout the grounds, and you can get out and see them up close, etc. Now, presently, the cemetery is closed because of the COVID-19, and it's unclear if they're going to have all of the various services next month like they normally have for Memorial Day. They're not sure about that yet. Now, I visited Arlington many, many years ago when it was free and we were able to drive ourselves around, and I would love to go back and visit sometime. With so much history and sites like this, it's definitely worth putting on your visitation list if you can make it to the Washington, D.C. area.